In December 2023, triathlete Dewald van der Westhuizen was out on an early morning training ride with his coach when he was struck by a vehicle driven by Garth Pasha, who was a Navy employee in Simonstown. Pasha not only rammed into van der Westhuizen, but also failed to stop at the scene. And now last week, the Simonstown Magistrates Court handed down a ruling in this case, sentencing Pasha to an effective 13,000 Rand fine, suspended jail time, and also reinstating both his driver's and firearms license. The ruling has sparked outrage within the cycling community, many arguing that the punishment does not fit the crime, also sends a very, very poor message about any repercussions when it comes to unsafe drivers and cyclists. We have reached out to Dewald van der Westhuizen to join us on air. He declined, but he did send this message, and he says, "I've given it some thought, and I'm going to decline the interview. At this point, I just want to move beyond the case. We made as much noise as we could, went as high as we could, and still this was the result. It's clear that justice in this country is a myth. You're welcome to quote me on that. There is no justice in South Africa. The corruption runs deep, even down in Simonstown. This has been the final straw for me. We're now seriously planning a move to the US. It's a different monster, sure, but one I'm willing to fight than the rot we've got here," says Dewald van der Westhuizen. Joining me now is Neil Robinson, Pedal Power Association. Good morning, Neil. Appreciate your time. What does this judgment tell you in the court's response to any repercussions when it comes to motorists driving dangerously, illegally, and accidents when it comes to cyclists, particularly in this case of Dewald van der Westhuizen? Neil, good morning.
Good morning, Lester. Thanks for having me. Yes, I think Dewald's statement said most of it, and our statement at PPA said a lot of it this week. We're very disturbed, in fact disgusted, and very saddened by the sentence passed down. It sends out the wrong message. I've said it so many times before. South Africa is a lawless society, and it is that because the consequences do not fit the crime. People get away with lots of things in this country, from high-ups right down to petty crime. And our system, be it SAPS, the courts, the NPA, any prosecuting authority, I don't think has the resources, the money, and sometimes, frankly, the inclination to prosecute and get the full effects of what should happen to some of these perpetrators. I think it's absolutely ridiculous what's happened to Dewald in this case. He went through so much pain and trauma, emotionally and physically, 5 operations, almost lost his leg, broke his back, broke his leg, and this is what happens. I don't care about the mitigating or aggravating circumstances in a crime like this. Whatever the person's circumstances are at home, at work, etc., if you do this kind of thing, you should be punished. And it's time that we spoke up against these. For me, it's a heinous crime, and the punishment is derisory. It's as simple as that.
Also, the charges that Pasha faced. He was initially released on 5,000 Rands bail, and he pleaded guilty to the charge of only reckless driving, or the charges presented to him was that of reckless driving and failure to stop at the scene of a crash. If we know any collision between a vehicle and a pedestrian or a cyclist, who's going to come off worse off? It's going to be the person who's not covered in metal and maybe even a safety belt or some sort of roll cage. It's going to be the person who's using the street as a pedestrian, as a cyclist. If you even look at the charges presented to Dewald, to Pasha, it doesn't match the severity of the injuries of Dewald, in which he even could have lost his life.
No, correct, Lester, 100%. And we actually have a 1 meter pass law in the Western Cape. In other words, a car, any motorized transport passing a cyclist on a road has to provide 1 meter distance between the car, the vehicle, and the cyclist. So, clearly if someone's hit the way he was hit, Dewald was hit, that's that law breaking. So why have the law in the first place? You know, that's a lot of the cyclists' point, and I get why the cycling community is upset about this. It's not like he was breaking the law. Yes, and I do see a lot of cyclists riding 2-3 abreast, and they are breaking the law, and we don't support those kinds of cycling behaviors. But Dewald was out at 5 o'clock with his coach Mike Moriarty training for an Ironman, riding single file, and he was hit from behind. Now, I'm not sure why we have the laws we do if they're not going to be prosecuted properly. And I've got no idea. In fact, I'm trying to get a meeting with the NPA about what's happened, why, and when, and who made the decision. And it's something we should really. It's kind of the hill I'm going to die on in a sense, because if we don't stand up against these kinds of things, where it's a violation.
But who enforces that 1 meter pass law? It seems as if a law that can only be enforced after there has been an accident. I'm not trying to virtue signal here, but I try to keep a good and fair distance,
Sure.
even riding across the center line to try and get as far as possible.
Yes.
Don't expect a noddy badge, but who is there to enforce if motorists are not obeying a 1 meter pass law every single day?
Well, Lester, this is the case. I go back to my original statement. South Africa is lawless. We talk on our cell phones without hands-frees. We do 61 in the 60 zone. When this kind of thing happens, you would think it's obvious that there are going to be proper punishments handed out for something like this. Clearly, he wasn't giving the rider a 1 meter berth. I mean, this is basic 101 physics. So I'm not sure as to how we move forward with this. The cycling community, and it's everyone who rides it, well, most people who ride bicycles do drive cars at the same time. So we are aware of this kind of behavior. And yes, there are accidents in Europe. Yes, there are accidents in America, crashes, incidents, etc. But there is certainly a completely different behavior groundswell, or almost a sort of a different culture where people do give people time to, if there's cyclists on the road, they give them the berth. As you say, you don't need a noddy badge for it, but it's just common courtesy. You know, someone is, if there's a learner driver in front of you, someone learning to drive. My daughter's learning to drive her car at the moment. We understand that people are going to get irritated and upset, and so they're going to start hooting and stuff like that. But guys, you're going to get your meeting probably 5 minutes later than you would have already got to the meeting. Just have more respect and patience for others on the road. That is the problem in South Africa.
Do you think there would be any mitigation in the sentencing or conduct of the driver if he had stopped? And because part of the charge was also leaving the scene of an accident. If he had stopped, but stopping also then is the admission, gosh, I've done something wrong here. Do you think there'd been any different response if it was a case of a driver that didn't flee, but a driver who stayed and says, I acknowledge there was an accident, we can talk about the circumstances, but at least I'm not driving. I acknowledge that you were hurt because of some fault on someone's part. Doesn't need to acknowledge that, but you think that would have been some sort of form of mitigation of motorists actually acknowledging, I've hurt someone or someone was hurt, but I'm staying on the scene?
I don't know, Lester. That is up for the court to decide. But in my personal subjective opinion, I probably would have been. Pasha actually stopped. He stopped his car, I think I don't know the exact distance, but probably half a kilometer, 500 meters away from where the accident happened, to stop and look at his car. Mike actually shouted to him, screamed to come and help. And whether he didn't, I don't know what happened, but he drove off again. Whether he didn't hear him or whatever the case may be, I've got no idea. And I don't know whether they would have, in mitigation, reduced the sentence. But the sentence, as it stands, as I said, is paltry and derisory. It is. I actually don't have words for it. Yeah. We are so angry.
Neil, really appreciate your conversation. Neil Robinson, CEO of the Pedal Power Association.